Hello, souls and demons. And today I have 3 stories all about possession of various forms for you. So sit back, relax, grip your seats, and enjoy. This first story is called I've Been Possessed by a Demon, written by ventext. It was a month ago today. January had been a pretty good month. I had just gotten out of a depressive slump from a pretty nasty breakup, and I felt like I could take on anything. On top of that, I got a raise so I could finally move into my own place and bid a fond farewell to my dad's house. I had already picked out the perfect apartment that was cheap, but good enough to justify moving in. So for a 20-something, it was perfect. One of my favorite parts of this crappy slice of heaven was a small porch built into the building, separated from the living room by a glass door. It was supposed to have a screen to stop bugs, but I never bothered to complain about it. One night I was smoking a cigarette, leaning up against the railing and looking down at the parking lot, half filled with cars. I saw the elderly couple 2 floors down get in their car and drive off. Then over by the fence on the other side of the parking lot, I saw it. It was dark out, so at first I thought it was just a man climbing the fence. But when it hopped over and approached the building, even in the streetlights it was pitch black, except his eyes and its mouth. From where I stood, they looked like they were glowing. Horrified by whatever that thing was, I froze. It locked its eyes with mine. Then it smiled. In a flash, it began climbing the building, and it was on the porch before I could get to the door. Once again, I was frozen, not with fear, but the realization that I was outmatched. I got a good look at him. This strange silhouette of it looked almost human. Its limbs were just too long and its body emaciated. And when I looked into its eyes or its mouth, I was chilled to the bone. It's as if the creature was completely hollow, and some hellfire was eternally set in its insides. When its eyes widened, I could feel the air grow warmer. In an oddly normal voice, it spoke. "I need a vessel, mortal, and you'll do for a few months. Displease me, and I will make your life much worse than it already will be." And with that, he walked into me, and seemingly vanished as he touched me. I felt the most horrible pain I've ever felt in my life, as if every single nerve on my body had been set on fire. I patted myself out, rolling on the ground, but it was no use. It was the demon somehow. As a former atheist, the prospect of this already terrified me enough, but now I couldn't help but look toward the future with horror. What's going to happen to me? But after an hour or so of laying on the porch in agony, it ended just as abruptly as when it started. A chill went down my spine when I heard him saying in the back of my mind, "It is done." I went to bed that night too terrified to fall asleep. I don't remember when I did manage to get to sleep, but I just remember waking up and feeling awful. I coughed and blood came out in small spurts. I called an ambulance and they arrived at the complex, but as soon as they reached the stairs, I blacked out. When I woke up again, they were mutilated at my feet, their blood oozing through the wooden stairs in buckets. I blacked out again, this time no doubt because I wasn't able to handle a sight like that. Ever since that day, I blacked out and ended up places where I've never been. Always at a crime scene. Then I black out once more and wake up at home. Then as the law caught up with me, it became motel after motel. The demon seemed to be one step ahead of them with rare moments of lucidity on my part. But when I was awake, the agony didn't end. As the days started to go by, my cough got worse. And for lack of a better term, my body started to deteriorate. My teeth began to fall out no matter how well I took care of them. My hair was next. That one only took 2 days. After 2 weeks, I finally gave up and decided to do the world a favor and kill off the both of us. I took the handgun I stored under my bed, and when I pulled the trigger, I blacked out. I woke up and the gun had been completely dismantled. I realized my index finger was bleeding and I looked up at the wall, seeing the message he'd scrawled in my blood. "You'll never be rid of me," accompanying it with a crude smiley face. I can't kill myself. I can't prevent him from committing terrible, disturbing things. And that horrible burning sensation when he entered my body? It's come back and it won't go away. If anyone can help me or think of a way I can kill myself, please tell me. I can't live like this. Alright, story number 2 is Possession at St. Montgomery's Retirement Home. Written by Mr. Mojo Ryzen 95. On a cold January night, the orderlies wheeled in a hellish woman who appeared on the verge of death. Myself and the other 2 nurses raced to her bed, setting her up with an IV. The woman's skin was tight and devoid of color. Thick blue veins traced along every inch of her body. Her eyes were sunken deep into her skull where 2 beady eyes nearly glossed over floated about. The patchy blotches on her head seemed to fall out in sickly strands with every move. While I went to rest her head on a pillow, her slack-jawed mouth hung open, revealing an army of yellowy, stained, rotten teeth. The smell that arose from her mouth nearly made me lose my lunch. We restrained the woman to the cot, where she thrashed violently. After a few moments, and a light sedative, the woman lay still. Her breathing was shallow, her sunken-in chest rising and falling gently. I spoke to the orderlies who drove her here. Her name was Claudette. She had been transferred from another facility after an altercation with another resident. I pressed further about the incident, wondering if her roommate was going to mind. The orderly told me that Claudette had bitten the throat of another woman before digging her fingers into her eyes, fully blinding her. My heart began to flutter as the story went on. My eyes peered towards Claudette's room. Her crooked head faced me. Her sunken eyes seemed to stare into my soul. She bore her teeth at me, the yellow-stained chiclets like tiny daggers. I walked back to the nurse station and prepared for the rest of my night shift. At about 3:13 a.m., a devilish scream erupted from down the hall. I raced out of my seat, nearly knocking over my Red Bull. Coming from Claudette's room, I braced myself as the screaming continued. I busted into the room where Claudette was convulsing in her restraints. Claudette let out wails like a dying animal. She braced against her restraints. Blood was trickling down her arms and legs. Her loose skin was wearing at the seams as the restraints dug into her. Claudette shrieked, gnawing her teeth at me before I could administer more of the sedative. All I could think of was Claudette leaping onto another resident and sinking those gnarly teeth into flesh. As the sedative took its course, Claudette's convulsions ceased and began to slip into unconsciousness. I delicately tried to address the wounds on her legs and arms. Thick trails of blood stained on the bedsheets. After we cleaned Claudette, I headed back to the nurse's station and prayed for a quiet night. Morning rose and my shift had ended, which meant I could head home and try to sleep as the rest of the world began their day. I struggled to catch some sleep as my mind raced back to the animalistic eyes of Claudette, her teeth gnawing at me. My phone alarm buzzed and I begrudgingly got ready and prepared for another shift. When I arrived at the retirement home, Lydia, one of the other nurses, was weeping by the coat closet. I spoke to her, trying to get a straight answer, but all she could do was point towards Claudette's room. My heart began to beat out of my chest, feeling a sense of dread wash over me. I nervously stepped towards Claudette's room, where the smell of bodily fluids filled the air. I slowly opened the door. The rotten smell of feces and vomit stung my nostrils. I braced myself opening the door, only to be met with the sounds of squashing and slurping. Claudette was gnawing at the tips of her fingers. Her pinky and ring finger lay neatly on the floor. I screamed out for help, where a few other nurses came rushing down. When we all tried to assist Claudette, she looked into my eyes. The burning flame of hatred seemed to burn within those pupils. We struggled to pull Claudette's fingers away from her mouth. Streams of blood squirted out from her tips onto my face. Claudette let out a childish laugh, which turned into maniacal laughter. It was like trying to restrain a bodybuilder. This frail, decrepit woman was resisting the three of us. With a final maniacal laugh, Claudette managed to fling the three of us off of her, each of us tipping back towards onto the floor. Claudette's laugh turned into a deep, guttural growl. Her body raised from the bed, levitating in the air, prevented by the restraints from fully floating away. Claudette's body arched and contorted in a sickening way. The three of us watched in horror as bones pierced her paper-thin skin. The lights flickered, leaving us in temporary darkness. Claudette crashed onto the bed, her body a mess of bloody limbs and bones folded like a pretzel. She wasn't breathing. We all looked at each other in horror of the bloody mess that was once Claudette in front of us. As we tried to clean up, a nasty burn kept appearing on my wrist. I tried frantically washing Claudette's blood off of me. It seemed like it was seeping into me. I went home that next morning feeling like I was out of my body. My senses felt off. Tastes didn't seem quite right. I smelled like I'd been rolling around in a pig pen. As I struggled for the sleep that night, the guttural laughs of Claudette echoed in my head, only to be replaced by her speaking directly to me. Alright, third and final story of the night is called A Demon Has Possessed My Boss by NazgulTalion. That's all that is going through my head as I go through his things. Just 2 hours ago, the cops came to my house, telling me that they have proved my boss is responsible for a string of disappearances these past 2 months. They said he'd finally slipped up, leaving fingerprints of the most recent victims found the day before. I couldn't believe it. I had only been working for him for 2 years, but he was the nicest man I had ever known. Wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone kill a person. More importantly, he was on a business trip. I had booked the tickets myself. According to cops, however, he never got on the flight. So here I am going through his stuff, initially trying to figure out where he was, only to get way more than I bargained for. Tons of research on demons, specifically how to exorcise or release them. Of course, this may sound far-fetched, and I'm sure the cops felt that way. But I know my boss. Him being possessed by a demon makes more sense than him killing people. I fear now that the demon has taken control fully. Thankfully, these notes are extensive, teaching me quite a bit over the last hour. The demon is called Belial, an evil but weak entity that roams the earth after escaping hell. It has been around for centuries, known for possessing the worst humankind has to offer and killing young women. That didn't make sense. Only the most recent victim fit that bill, and Solomon was one of mankind's best. Seems Belial is doing everything differently this time. However, what makes him truly dangerous is his experience. This is a demon that has been possessing humans for a long time, giving him the knowledge to blend in with us. He could possess someone close to you, take full control instantly, and you would be none the wiser. All this time I failed to notice anything. Thoughts pop into my head of what it could have been done to me. Skinning me alive, cutting me up piece by piece. I can almost feel the blade cutting my skin. But I quickly disperse such thoughts. I need to focus. I'm not sure how Solomon was able to do this while being possessed, but I had everything I needed to save him. The process of releasing the demon was simple. Just had to recite what seemed to be a spell in Latin. The problem was I had to get close enough for him to hear it. For Solomon's sake, I must. There is no one else. Though I first need to find him. If he wasn't home, the only other place he could be was his cabin he likes to retreat to every once in a while. I rushed to my car and head straight over. The drive there was stressful. If you hadn't guessed already, I actually had feelings for my boss. Nothing ever actually happened between us when I told him about it once, and he simply said I wasn't his type. That ended any hopes of romance, but my feelings still remained. It breaks my heart to learn he has been battling with this for so long. I only wish he had come to me. Much to my dismay, I arrived to see police cars outside already, several of them parked in a row. I get out, pulling the gun out of my purse, and head towards the broken down house. I knew the demon was dangerous, but nothing could have prepared me for this sight. The walls had been painted red with blood, while the floor was decorated with bodies. Even worse was the smell of it all. Death and blood all mixed together. It was a massacre. They never stood a chance. I go back out the door and throw up for a good minute. "You shouldn't have come here," I hear from behind me. It was Officer Jensen, somehow still alive. "You need to get out of here. That thing isn't your boss. It isn't human." "I know. I have a way for stopping it," I retort. "There is no stopping that. It ripped us apart like paper. Our guns weren't even fast enough to touch it. You need to run." He was crying. Jensen was one of the toughest cops I knew, and the demon turned him into a sobbing mess. I was terrified myself. It is one thing to read about the demon, but to see his handiwork with my own eyes was something else entirely. That said, I was the only one who knew how to put it down. So after taking a moment to compose myself, I ignored Jensen's objections and head inside. Jensen, despite everything, followed me. I couldn't complain. I certainly needed all the help I could get. I explore the ground floor first. All I see is body after body, all sliced open. Violence was not something I had experience with, but even I knew this was not something any normal man could do. It had butchered them like they were just pieces of meat. Eventually I got up to the stairs, each step creaking. When I got there, I saw him. Aside from being covered in blood, he looked just like Solomon. No monstrous features at all, perfectly human. "Well, if it isn't my lovely little assistant. Hello, Angela. What brings you to my humble abode?" It greets me happily. It's his voice, his body, his face, his smile. But it is just not him. "Solomon is my boss, not you, Belial. That's right, I know who you are, what you are, and I have come to get rid of you," I say to him, failing to hide the fear inside of me. "Oh, is that so? How lovely. I cannot use this body anyway now that the police know. Go on, recite that spell for me," it says confidently. I was confused, but I didn't have time to think as Jensen begins firing his gun from behind me. The demon just sits there, catching each of the bullets with his bare hands. Then he flicks one back at Jensen, killing him instantly. I hear a large thump as his body drops behind me. I don't dare to look. Instead, I simply drop my own gun, knowing now it is useless. That was rude, don't you think? Well, now go on then, I don't really have all day. I still didn't understand, but if it meant it not fighting back, then I didn't mind. Immediately I began reciting the spell, making sure to say every word correctly. It finally starts to react. It's surprised. This isn't the spell it's expecting. Getting up, it shouts, "Wait a minute! This isn't the releasing spell!" I don't stop to listen, continuing to recite what I had memorized. "You foolish girl, stop! This is a seal!" He cuts off. "It isn't working," he cries in agony. "You don't know what you were doing. He is no better than—" Cut off again. The spell is finished, the shouting stops. I slowly approach him, hoping it is my boss. "Sir, is that you?" I ask hopefully. He gets up and smiles. "Yes, my dear, thank you." And instantly I know it's him. I didn't think I would ever get control back. I'd hug you, but well, I'm covered in blood. He seemed quite calm for someone who just had his body possessed by a demon and murdered a bunch of people. Well, looks like you found my instructions, good job. This has been quite a hellish week. That poor girl and those cops, all dead because of that thing. And explaining this is going to be a nightmare. I will have to go into hiding for now, I suppose, till I figure something out. Something wasn't right. This whole thing was off. He was possessed by a demon and all he cared about was explaining it to the cops. He was too calm. As he heads past me and towards the stairs, I start looking through the notes. Maybe this was a side effect, or maybe I had failed. That's when it hits me. Belial is experienced enough to have total control over those he possesses. So how was Solomon able to write these notes unless... I turn towards him. Hellish week? You mean month, right? That's how long the killings have been going on for. He stops in his tracks, slowly turning towards me. Ah, yes. Well, actually those previous victims weren't Belial's. What do you mean? I ask, but deep down I think I already knew. I had read about Belial, knew the kind of people he possessed, the kind of people he killed. I think you know. To the cops and, well, most people, murder is all the same. They probably didn't realize the difference between the most recent victim and the previous ones. Every kill is unique and beautiful in its own way. I summoned Belial in hopes I would meet a kindred spirit who would appreciate what I did. But instead he just took over my body. And worse, he had no finesse, no technique, no love for the kill. Just looked for some weak prey to butcher like an animal. His voice was rising. I had never seen him get angry before. You see, Angela, murder is an art, and I am an artist. All I wanted was for someone who would appreciate my art. Belial just wasn't the one. He was an amateur. I am professional. I start to back away from him, more scared now than I'd ever been around the demon. He smiles at me now, seemingly composing himself. Sorry, I'm not usually like this. It's just been a while, you know. No need to worry though. As I told you once, you aren't my type.